Imagine a battlefield where the screams of thousands are drowned not by the clashing of swords, but by the sheer collapse of human expectation. Where a single engagement reshaped not only the map of empires, but the very wiring of the human mind. What if I told you that one battle, more than any other in recorded history, fundamentally altered how humans perceive fear, cooperation, and the boundaries of survival? This is not the story of heroism in the conventional sense, nor is it merely a military narrative. It is a story about the neuropsychology of trauma, the evolution of social cohesion under extreme stress, and the paradoxical ways that collective human behavior adapts to the unimaginable. The battle I speak of, often referred to in historical texts as the turning point of human conflict, occurred in a context so brutal that it forced humanity to confront its own nature in ways that echo through our brains even today. To understand its significance, we must examine it through the lenses of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. This was not merely a clash of armies, but a crucible in which the human brain, social networks, and cultural instincts were recalibrated. The battlefield was located in a landscape that at first glance seems almost poetic, a valley surrounded by steep ridges, rivers cutting through the terrain like veins, and forests that whispered warnings no human ear could decipher. Armies converged with a scale that had rarely been witnessed, and the leaders involved were as much students of strategy as they were of human behavior, consciously or unconsciously testing the limits of the human psyche. What makes this event remarkable is not just the numbers of combatants or the sophistication of tactics, but the way human cognition and social dynamics were stretched beyond their natural limits. Stress responses were triggered at unprecedented levels. Hormones surged, instincts clashed with learned behaviors. Observers of human behavior often speak of a fight or flight response, but in this battle, something deeper occurred: a collective, almost networked adaptation where fear became a signal for cooperation rather than disintegration. Neurobiologists today might describe this as the synchronous firing of the amygdala across thousands of brains simultaneously, a phenomenon so rare that it has few parallels outside of catastrophic, high-stress environments. In practical terms, what this meant for the soldiers, commanders, and civilians who were caught in the conflict was a radical reshaping of decision-making processes under duress. The human brain, in essence, was being rewired on a mass scale. The immediate context of the battle was political, yes, but the deeper story is psychological. Leaders on both sides understood, perhaps intuitively, that controlling fear could be more decisive than controlling territory. Troops trained in conventional tactics were suddenly confronted with sensory overload: artillery, fire, cries, and the sudden disappearance of familiar formations. Cognitive neuroscience teaches us that when humans experience extreme novelty combined with threat, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for higher reasoning, often shuts down, leaving instinctual networks in charge. In this environment, conventional command structures were insufficient. Soldiers had to rely on emergent social rules, informal hierarchies, and a kind of intuitive empathy that allowed units to act in concert despite the chaos. Imagine a neural network where each node is a human being, and each synapse represents communication, trust, or perception under stress. The battlefield became a live demonstration of a system adapting in real time, with feedback loops that were both destructive and preservative. Decisions made in milliseconds by individual soldiers had ripple effects across entire divisions. One misjudged retreat could trigger a cascade of failure. One inspired maneuver could create a synchronized surge across thousands of individuals. Historians often speak in numbers and timelines, but the invisible undercurrent, the human network, was the true axis upon which history turned. Philosophically, this battle challenges conventional notions of human nature. We tend to think of humans as rational actors, but what this event demonstrates is that our rationality is deeply contingent upon the environment and the intensity of perceived threats. Under extreme conditions, we are neither wholly rational nor wholly irrational. We are adaptive. Evolutionary psychology suggests that our ancestors who survived catastrophic conflict were not necessarily the strongest or most cunning in conventional terms, but the most capable of integrating signals from their environment, their peers, and their own internal states to produce coherent action. This is where the paradox arises. In the midst of destruction, the very elements that threaten life, chaos, uncertainty, fear become catalysts for emergent order. It is a feedback loop in which vulnerability becomes a protective mechanism in which panic can be channeled into collective resilience. and in which what appears to be individual weakness may actually be the signal that preserves the system as a whole. The battle thus operates not only on the physical plane, but also on the psychological and philosophical planes, forcing us to reconsider what survival truly entails. It is no longer sufficient to view history as a series of conquests. We must also see it as a laboratory for the human mind and social structures. One of the most striking aspects of this event, when examined through a neuroscientific lens, is the way memory and perception were affected. Research into traumatic memory suggests that extreme stress can both fragment and consolidate memory simultaneously. Soldiers who survived reported vivid, almost hallucinatory recollections of certain sequences, moments of absolute terror, unexpected cooperation, and near-death experiences, while other periods seemed to evaporate entirely from consciousness. This selective encoding is not merely anecdotal. It has profound implications for understanding how societies remember trauma. Collective memory, in many ways, is an emergent property of these individual neurological events. Societies that experienced this battle did not just record events. They encoded them into cultural narratives, rituals, and moral frameworks. Stories of heroism, betrayal, and endurance are manifestations of neural processes on a societal scale. This is why the battle left an imprint not only on maps and borders, but on the way humans interpret fear, loyalty, and obligation for generations to come. It is as though the battlefield functioned as a neuron firing event for the culture itself, transmitting signals that shaped cognition far beyond the individuals directly involved. Moreover, the interplay of individual and collective decision-making reveals a complex architecture of human social adaptation. Neuroscientists describe networks of neurons that exhibit both local processing and global integration. In human terms, this translates to individuals making rapid, instinct-driven decisions that simultaneously feed into and are constrained by group dynamics. Soldiers who might have been reckless alone were tempered by peer observation, subtle cues, and emergent trust, while cautious individuals found themselves propelled into action by the network effect. The battlefield, then, becomes an experimental framework for understanding resilience, adaptability, and the neuropsychological underpinnings of cooperation. This is not just theoretical. Historical records indicate that entire regiments survived by developing what we might now describe as real-time social algorithms, heuristics for distributing attention, allocating risk, and modulating emotional responses. It is astonishing to consider that the patterns forged under such duress echo in the way modern humans handle crises, from natural disasters to social upheavals, suggesting that these adaptive mechanisms are deeply conserved in our species. Psychologically, the battle also exposes the tension between immediate survival instincts and long-term societal consequences. Humans operate within a dual-system cognitive framework: fast, intuitive reactions driven by emotion and slower, reflective processes informed by deliberation. The extremity of the battlefield compressed these timescales, forcing rapid integration of instinctive and reflective thought in ways that most human experiences do not. The consequences of misalignment were catastrophic. Yet, remarkably, the survivors and their societies developed mechanisms for integrating these experiences into functional behavioral schemas. Fear, once an overwhelming individual sensation, became a social cue, a shared parameter for coordinating large-scale actions. Pain and exhaustion were not merely tolerated. They were transformed into signals for timing, risk assessment, and cohesion. The battlefield became a crucible in which basic neural processes were co-opted for the emergent purpose of collective survival, demonstrating a principle that evolutionary psychologists call group-level selection in a particularly vivid form. Essentially, the event illustrates that under extreme conditions, the survival of the collective can override individual limitations in ways that are both physiologically and culturally encoded. This brings us to a counterintuitive insight. What appears to be vulnerability in the moment may serve as a protective mechanism for the group over time. Neuroscience and social theory converge here. Moments of hesitation, apparent weakness, or even panic can produce feedback signals that alert the network, recalibrate expectations, and allow emergent strategies to form. Historians often interpret retreats, chaotic maneuvers, or breakdowns in discipline as failures, but from a neurosocial perspective, these behaviors may have been critical adaptations. The battlefield, in other words, teaches us that human nature is not a static entity. It is a responsive system, capable of leveraging apparent flaws into mechanisms for long-term resilience. In this sense, the battle was not only a physical contest, but also an evolutionary signal, prompting society to reorganize cognition, emotion, and social rules around a new baseline of what is survivable, bearable, and strategically meaningful. In terms of philosophical reflection, the battle invites us to reconsider the essence of courage, morality, and agency. Traditional narratives valorize individual heroism or strategic genius, but the underlying lesson is more subtle. True adaptation occurs when humans integrate vulnerability into collective intelligence. This challenges the Aristotelian notion of virtue as a purely individual pursuit, suggesting instead a model where ethical and practical wisdom emerges from interdependence, stress adaptation, and shared risk. The battlefield becomes a mirror for society itself, reflecting the ways in which extreme circumstances can catalyze the emergence of new norms, behaviors, and cultural architectures. Our perception of human nature, then, must account for both the immediate physiological responses to stress and the broader cultural encoding of these experiences. This dual perspective is critical for understanding why the event left an indelible mark on human history. It redefined what humans could tolerate, achieve, and transmit to future generations. Historical data corroborates this neurological and philosophical analysis. After the battle, survivors reported systematic changes in decision-making, trust networks, and social hierarchies. Survivors reported Military historians note shifts in formation, discipline, and command structures that align remarkably well with what contemporary psychologists would predict from high-stress adaptive behavior. Anthropologists document rituals, memorials, and oral traditions that encode lessons of cooperation, timing, and emotional regulation. Sociologists recognize patterns in migration, alliance formation, and urban restructuring that can be traced to the collective processing of extreme trauma. In other words, the battle functioned as a multi-level adaptation experiment, where individuals, groups, and societies recalibrated simultaneously. The event did not merely shape the political or territorial landscape. It shaped the cognitive and social landscapes of human populations, altering the probabilities of survival, cooperation, and cultural persistence. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson lies in the paradoxical interplay of chaos and order. Neurobiology teaches us that systems under stress may enter a state of criticality, where they are maximally responsive, highly interconnected, and capable of rapid reorganization. The battle exemplified this state on a human scale. Small perturbations, like an individual's decision or a sudden environmental change, could cascade into systemic transformations. Conversely, these cascades were constrained by emergent norms, trust networks, and adaptive heuristics. Humans, in effect, became neurons in a gigantic, self-organizing network, with each action modulating the dynamics of the whole. This principle resonates with modern understandings of complex systems theory. Resilience and adaptability do not emerge from perfection or control, but from the capacity to integrate variability, absorb shocks, and reorganize in response to signals. The battle, then, is a historical demonstration of a universal principle governing both neural and social networks, revealing that our species is capable of extraordinary adaptation when faced with extreme adversity. As we reflect on the long-term consequences, it becomes clear that this battle did not merely end wars or redraw borders. It changed the way humans experience fear, trust, and social obligation. It provided a model for adaptive behavior under stress that would echo in subsequent conflicts. Cultural practices and psychological conditioning, educational systems, leadership doctrines, and even modern organizational theory owe something to the neurosocial recalibrations first tested on that valley floor. Philosophically, it challenges us to rethink resilience. It is not the absence of fear, failure, or chaos that defines human strength, but the ability to integrate, respond, and emerge transformed. We are, in essence, still processing the signals emitted on that battlefield, encoding lessons in our neural circuits, social networks, and collective consciousness. So, what does this mean for us today? In a world of global crises, pandemics, and socio-political upheaval, understanding how humans adapt under extreme stress is more than an academic exercise. It is a guide for survival, empathy, and collective action. The battlefield, though distant in time, provides a lens to examine our own neurological and social systems. How do we perceive risk? How do we allocate attention and trust under uncertainty? How do we transform vulnerability into resilience? These are not rhetorical questions. They are practical, scientific, and deeply human questions that resonate as strongly now as they did centuries ago. The historical event we have explored is thus not only a story of war, but a story of the human condition itself, of how our minds and societies evolve in response to extreme pressures. As we conclude this journey through history, neuroscience, and philosophy, remember that human nature is not a fixed narrative written in stone. It is a dynamic, responsive system, capable of remarkable adaptation, creativity, and survival. The battle we have examined serves as both a warning and a guide. Extreme circumstances will come, but our capacity to transform fear into cooperation, chaos into strategy, and vulnerability into systemic strength defines the enduring essence of humanity. History, neuroscience, and philosophy converge to reveal that what seems like individual weakness may, paradoxically, be the mechanism by which societies endure. What signals are we receiving today, and how are we integrating them into the networks of our lives? How will we encode our own experiences for future generations as lessons of resilience, cooperation, and adaptation? I invite you to reflect, to comment, and to explore these questions with a critical and curious mind. If this exploration has illuminated new perspectives on human nature and history for you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Past Lens for more journeys into the moments where history, psychology, and philosophy intersect. Together, we can uncover the hidden structures that shape our collective experience and deepen our understanding of what it means to be human.